A fan favorite in sports is an athlete that gets people off their seat. Or in the entertainment world, it's someone who gets people into their seats. But how about a fan favorite monitor? Well, it gets the people going, or at least buying it for gaming. Hey, I'm Nicholas from Ratings.com. Today we're going to talk about the popular MSI MPG 271QRX. It's actually a monitor that came out last year, but it's still popular and remains fantastic for gaming. In a saturated market of 1440p 360Hz QD-OLEDs like this one, what is it about this monitor that makes it so popular against models from Samsung, ASUS, Gigabyte, and Dell? And is it worth getting over these other options? First, looking at the monitor, it's pretty simple with some gaming elements like RGB lighting and branding on the back. Plus, it's well made, which is what you should expect from a high-end monitor. On top of that, it offers fantastic ergonomics, and you could adjust the stand in any way you want. There's also a cutout that helps with cable management. And while you're here, looking at this basic monitor, you'll probably notice the inputs too. They're down-facing and set into the monitor, so they can be hard to reach. But it has a pretty standard range of ports. 2 HDMI 2.1 bandwidth ports, 1 DisplayPort 1.4 input, and an audio jack. It also has a USB hub with 2 USB-As, but they're limited to USB 2.0 speeds, so data transfer is slow. There's also a USB-C that supports DisplayPort alt mode and 90 watts of power delivery. This is pretty useful if you want to connect a laptop and charge it with one cable. And because it has a KVM switch, you could use the same devices on 2 computers connected to the monitor, making it easy to switch between the two. So far, there's nothing that really stands out. It's just like all the other kids at school. So how does it perform? Well, most of you know how a QD-OLED performs, and there are no surprises here. You could reach the monitor's max refresh rate over HDMI or DisplayPort, but your graphics card needs to use DSC compression for that. The monitor does have a setting to turn off DSC if you prefer not using it, but that means you get a lower refresh rate instead. Besides that, it supports all common VRR formats to reduce screen tearing with any source. And like any OLED, motion looks extremely sharp at any refresh rate, but of course, there's persistence blur at lower refresh rates. And sadly, it doesn't have a black frame insertion feature to reduce this blur. On the plus side, it has low input lag no matter the refresh rate you're gaming at, so it feels responsive. Just note that you get this consistently low input lag only after updating the firmware to 0.11 or newer. So just make sure to update the firmware when you get the monitor. So while it's fantastic for PC gaming, what about console gaming? It's incredible for that too. It supports any signal from an Xbox or PS5, and it downscales 4K signals when you have console mode enabled on the monitor. This results in a slightly more detailed image than a native 1440p signal. But of course, no monitor technology is perfect, and this one has some downsides. When it comes to gaming, you should know that it has distracting VRR Flicker with changing frame rates. It looks the worst in dark scenes, and there's no setting to try to reduce it. You could for sure avoid this issue if your PC maintains consistent frame rates though. And the most known downside of this monitor, which is the case with any OLED, is the famous risk of burn-in. Not to worry though, unless you're only working on it all day, every day with the monitor at max brightness, you shouldn't have any issues. If it does concern you, the monitor has a few settings to help extend the life of the panel. There's a panel protect setting that completes a pixel refresh cycle, and you could choose to be reminded to run it every 4 or 16 hours. It also has a built-in pixel shift that moves the image by a few pixels at a time so that the same pixels aren't always displaying the same thing. You could choose the speed at which it runs, but you can't turn it off. While it's not something you should use only for work, it's still fine for some productivity, but keep in mind that text isn't as sharp as on a 27-inch 1440p display with an LCD panel. This is because there's some fringing around letters or even at the edges of windows. Whether or not it bothers you changes from person to person, but the fringing is definitely there. If you do plan on using it in a bright room, you shouldn't have too many issues. It has incredible reflection handling, but with a glossy screen coating, you might find that some reflections from strong light sources are distracting. Plus, it doesn't get bright enough to fight a ton of glare, especially if you're using the monitor in SDR. It's fine if you have some lamps on, just don't place it opposite a sunny window. Of course, it gets much brighter in HDR, namely in the peak 1000 nits mode. Small highlights really pop against the rest of the image, but like any OLED, it can't maintain this brightness with larger highlights. It isn't perfectly accurate in terms of intended brightness either, as it displays most content a bit darker than what the creator intended. Plus, it doesn't let all highlights get as bright as possible. While this sounds negative, don't get confused. This monitor looks incredible in HDR. With a near infinite contrast ratio, blacks look deep and inky in dark rooms, and there isn't any blooming either. Just keep in mind that these blacks look purple in bright rooms, like with any QD-OLED. But one of the biggest advantages of a QD-OLED for HDR is how vivid colors look. It displays bright and dark colors without issue, and it displays a wide range of colors in both the DCI-P3 and Rec 2020 color spaces. This helps make your favorite content look realistic and really pop. Even if you're going to use it in SDR, it has accurate colors before any sort of calibration. The sRGB mode looks good, but it doesn't properly clamp all colors to the sRGB color space, so some are oversaturated. Of course, that isn't an issue unless you're a content creator, in which case you're probably calibrating the display anyways. So now that we know how it performs, what makes it so popular and is it worth getting? If you want a 1440p 360Hz QD-OLED, there's no question it's one of the best options you could get. There really isn't much you can knock against it, except the fact that you need to update the firmware to get the best out of it. Once you do, it performs like you'd expect from a QD-OLED with sharp motion, vivid colors, and bright highlights. Plus, the high refresh rate makes it a fantastic choice for competitive gaming. And the fact that it has some neat features can also help if you want to use the monitor for more than just gaming, like productivity. But here's the thing, we can and have said that about much of the competition. It's a copycat world, and many of the 1440p 360Hz QD-OLEDs that have came out last year have the same features and performance. Take the Gigabyte Aorus FO27Q3 for example. It's pretty similar overall, but one difference is that the MSI delivers more power over USB-C than on the Gigabyte. Helpful, sure, but only if you're connecting a laptop. So why is the MSI so popular when it's much like any other monitor? The ability to turn off DSE makes it so well liked for those who don't want their graphics card to use compression when gaming. Plus, one of the better selling points is its price. Depending on where you live, it tends to cost less than the competition, which is why it's one of our top recommended monitors for gaming. One monitor that's a bit different is the ASUS XG27AC DNG. This is because it gets brighter in SDR, so it's the better choice if you want something for a bright room. That said, it performs nearly the same otherwise, and actually has slightly worse motion handling at low refresh rates. So they each have some pros and cons, but the ASUS can sometimes cost less. That's all for the MSI MPG 271QRX. If you want more details on the monitor, check out our written review. The link is in the description below. Until next time, I'm Nicholas from Ratings.com, where we help you find the best product for your needs. Ciao.